The space between them on the couch had disappeared without either of them noticing, their thighs pressed together through the soft fabric of their pajama pants. And Alexander Phillips could feel the warmth radiating from Jerry Reed's body as Jerry turned toward him, his voice barely above a whisper when he said, "I miss how we used to be." The words hung in the air like a confession, and Alexander felt his heart stutter because they both knew exactly what Jerry meant, even if neither of them had ever said it out loud before this moment. Jerry's hand found its way to Alexander's knee, fingers splaying across the worn cotton, and Alexander could feel the slight tremor in Jerry's touch, the way his breath caught when their eyes met in the dim light of the living room. "Before everything got so complicated," Jerry continued, his thumb moving in small circles against Alexander's leg. And Alexander wanted to ask what he meant by complicated, wanted to know if Jerry was thinking about the same moments that had been keeping Alexander awake at night for months. "Jerry," Alexander started, but his voice cracked on the name, and Jerry's eyes dropped to his lips for just a second before meeting his gaze again. And in that moment, Alexander knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change between them, that they were standing on the edge of something that would either save them or destroy everything they had built together. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how two best friends who had sworn they would never complicate their friendship found themselves sitting close enough to feel each other's heartbeats. We need to go back to the beginning, to the day 3 months earlier when Jerry had shown up at Alexander's apartment at 2 in the morning, soaked from the rain and looking like his entire world had just fallen apart. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. Alexander had been half asleep when the knocking started, soft at first and then more insistent. And when he opened the door to find Jerry standing there with his hair plastered to his forehead and his clothes dripping onto the hallway carpet, his first thought was that something terrible had happened. Jerry's girlfriend Sandra had been acting strange for weeks, distant and cold in a way that had Jerry constantly on edge. And Alexander had watched his best friend slowly unravel as he tried to figure out what he had done wrong. "She broke up with me," Jerry said without preamble, stepping into the apartment and leaving a trail of water behind him, and Alexander felt something twist in his chest that he refused to examine too closely. He had never liked Sandra, had always thought she was wrong for Jerry in ways he could never quite articulate. But seeing the devastation on Jerry's face made him push those thoughts aside and focus on being the friend Jerry needed him to be. Alexander guided Jerry to the bathroom, found him dry clothes, and made tea while Jerry showered. And when Jerry emerged 20 minutes later, wearing Alexander's old college sweatshirt and a pair of borrowed sweatpants, he looked young and vulnerable in a way that made Alexander's hands shake as he handed over the steaming mug. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, Jerry curled into himself like he was trying to take up as little space as possible, and Alexander wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them and hold Jerry until the hurt went away. "She said I was emotionally unavailable," Jerry said, staring down at his tea like it held all the answers to the universe. "Said I was always somewhere else, even when I was with her." He looked up at Alexander then, his eyes red-rimmed and confused, and Alexander felt his heart break a little because he knew exactly what Sandra meant, had seen the way Jerry seemed to be going through the motions in his relationship, like he was playing a role that didn't quite fit. "Maybe she wasn't the right person for you," Alexander offered carefully, and Jeremy's laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's what she said too. Told me I was wasting her time because I was never really there, not completely." Jerry set his mug down on the coffee table and ran his hands through his damp hair, and Alexander noticed the way Jerry's fingers trembled slightly. "The thing is, Alex, I don't think I know how to be there for anyone. I feel like I'm always pretending, like I'm following some script I never actually learned properly." Alexander felt something shift in his chest at Jerry's words, a recognition that went deeper than simple friendship, and he found himself moving closer on the couch without really thinking about it. "You're not pretending with me," he said softly, and Jerry's eyes snapped to his, Martin searching. "No," Jerry agreed, his voice barely audible. "I'm not." The silence that followed was charged with something Alexander couldn't name, and he became acutely aware of the space between them, of the way Jerry's breathing had changed, shallow and uneven. Jerry's gaze dropped to Alexander's mouth for just a moment before he looked away, color rising in his cheeks, and Alexander felt his world tilt slightly on its axis. "Can I stay here tonight?" Jerry asked, and there was something in his voice that made Alexander's pulse quicken, a vulnerability that went beyond just needing a place to sleep. "I don't want to be alone." Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice, and when Jerry moved closer on the couch, close enough that their knees were almost touching, Alexander didn't pull away. They talked until dawn about everything and nothing, about Jerry's relationship with Sandra and the way he had felt like he was suffocating, about Alexander's own string of failed relationships and the persistent feeling that he was missing something essential about himself. As the sun began to filter through the windows, Jerry's head found its way to Alexander's shoulder, and Alexander held perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had settled over them. Jerry's breathing evened out as he drifted toward sleep, and Alexander allowed himself to rest his cheek against Jerry's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, mixed with something that was purely Jerry. When Jerry woke up hours later, they were tangled together on the couch, Alexander's arm around Jerry's waist and Jerry's face pressed against Alexander's neck. And for a moment, neither of them moved, both pretending to still be asleep while they processed the intimacy of their position. Finally, Jerry stirred, pulling back slightly, and Alexander immediately missed the warmth of his body. "Sorry," Jerry mumbled, but he didn't move away completely, and Alexander could feel the heat radiating from Jerry's skin where their legs were still touching. "Don't be," Alexander said, and something in his tone made Jerry look at him more closely, searching his face for something Alexander wasn't sure he was ready to reveal. The weeks that followed established a new pattern between them, one that felt both natural and terrifyingly fragile. Jerry spent more nights at Alexander's apartment than at his own, claiming he liked the company, and Alexander never questioned it, even though he suspected there was more to it than simple loneliness. They fell into an easy domestic rhythm, cooking dinner together and watching movies curled up on the couch, and Alexander tried not to read too much into the way Jerry always seemed to find reasons to touch him, fingers brushing when they passed dishes, hands finding each other during particularly intense scenes on television. It was during one of these movie nights, about a month after Jerry's breakup with Sandra, that everything began to shift more dramatically. They were watching some romantic comedy that Jerry had picked, and Alexander was only half paying attention to the screen because he was too focused on the way Jerry's thumb was tracing absent patterns on his forearm. The couple on screen was having their inevitable misunderstanding, and the female lead was crying about how she had never felt truly seen by anyone, and Jerry made a soft sound of agreement that made Alexander look at him more closely. "Do you ever feel like that?" Jerry asked, his eyes still on the television, but his voice thoughtful. "Like you're invisible, even to the people who are supposed to know you best?" Alexander considered the question, thinking about his own relationships, the way he had always felt like he was holding something back, keeping some essential part of himself hidden. "Yeah," he admitted. "Sometimes I think the only person who really sees me is you." Jerry's hand stilled on his arm, and when he turned to look at Alexander, there was something intense in his expression that made Alexander's breath catch. "I was going to say the same thing," Jerry said softly, and the air between them seemed to thicken with possibility. They didn't kiss that night, but something fundamental had shifted, and Alexander could feel it in the way Jerry looked at him, in the way their conversations became more intimate and honest. Jerry started talking about his relationships differently, analyzing them with a clarity that seemed new, and Alexander found himself hanging on every word. "I think I've been looking for the wrong things," Jerry said one evening as they sat on Alexander's balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sun set over the city. "All my relationships have felt like work, like I was trying to force myself to feel the things that should have come naturally." Alexander's heart was beating so hard he was sure Jerry could hear it. "What do you think you should be looking for instead?" Jerry was quiet for a long time, swirling the wine in his glass and staring out at the horizon. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I know what it feels like when it's right, when it's easy and natural and you don't have to think about it." "Like what?" Alexander asked, even though he was afraid of the answer. Jerry turned to look at him then, and Alexander saw something in his eyes that made his mouth go dry. "Like this," Jerry said simply. "Like us." The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither was quite ready to cross, And Alexander felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he tried to process what Jerry had just said. Jerry's eyes were wide, like he couldn't quite believe the words had come out of his mouth. And Alexander could see the moment when panic began to set in. I mean, Jerry started backtracking, as friends, the way we are as friends, it's easy and natural, and I never have to pretend with you. But his voice lacked conviction, and Alexander could see the uncertainty flickering across his face. Jerry, Alexander said softly, and something in his tone made Jerry go very still. What if it could be more than friendship? The question seemed to echo in the evening air, and Alexander watched as Jerry's expression shifted from panic to confusion to something that looked almost like hope. Jerry set his wine glass down with trembling hands and turned to face Alexander fully, and Alexander could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. I've been thinking about that, Jerry admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually, and it scares me because I don't know what it means about me, about who I am. Alexander reached out slowly, giving Jerry plenty of time to pull away, and covered Jerry's hand with his own. Jerry's skin was warm and slightly damp with nervousness, and Alexander could feel the fine tremor running through him. It doesn't have to mean anything except that you care about me, Alexander said, and that maybe the reason your other relationships felt like work is because you were trying to be someone you're not. Jerry's eyes filled with tears, and he turned his hand palm up so their fingers could intertwine. What if I'm not brave enough? He asked. What if I ruin everything between us? You won't, Alexander said with more confidence than he felt. We won't let that happen. They didn't talk about it again for several days, but the conversation had opened something between them, and Alexander could feel the change in every interaction. Jerry's touches became more deliberate, lingering longer than strictly necessary, and Alexander caught him staring sometimes with an expression that made Alexander's stomach flutter with possibility. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when they were cooking dinner together, moving around Alexander's small kitchen with the practiced ease of people who had done this dance many times before. Jerry was chopping vegetables while Alexander stirred sauce on the stove, and they were talking about work and mundane things, but there was an undercurrent of tension that had been building for days. Alexander reached past Jerry to grab a spice from the cabinet, and Jerry turned at the same moment, bringing them face to face with barely inches between them. Alexander could feel Jerry's breath on his lips, could see the flecks of gold in Jerry's brown eyes, and time seemed to slow as they stared at each other. Alex, Jerry breathed, and his name sounded different in Jerry's voice, charged with meaning and want, and Alexander felt his resolve crumble. Yeah? Alexander whispered back, and he saw Jerry's gaze drop to his mouth, saw the way Jerry's tongue darted out to wet his lips. I think I want to kiss you, Jerry said, and the admission hung between them like a confession. Alexander's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. You think? Jerry's hands came up to frame Alexander's face, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones, and Alexander leaned into the touch without thinking. I know, Jerry corrected, his voice stronger now. I know I want to kiss you. I've wanted to for weeks. Then do it, Alexander said, and Jerry's eyes widened slightly like he hadn't expected Alexander to be so direct. What if everything changes? Jerry asked, but he was already leaning closer, and Alexander could feel the heat radiating from his body. Everything already has changed, Alexander pointed out, and Jerry's smile was soft and wondering as he closed the remaining distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and questioning, but when Alexander kissed back, Jerry made a soft sound of surprise and pleasure that went straight through Alexander's chest. Jerry's hands tightened on his face, and the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent and desperate, like they were trying to pour months of unspoken feelings into this single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jerry rested his forehead against Alexander's and closed his eyes. That felt, he started, then stopped, shaking his head like he couldn't find the words. Right? Alexander suggested, and Jerry's eyes opened, bright and wondering. Yeah, Jerry breathed. It felt right. They stood there in the kitchen for a long hard time, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's air, and Alexander felt like something fundamental had shifted in the universe. The sauce on the stove was probably burning, and the vegetables Jerry had been chopping that were forgotten on the cutting board. But none of that seemed to matter in the face of what had just happened between them. "I need to tell you something," Alexander said finally, and Jerry pulled back slightly to look at him, concern flickering across his features. "What?" Jerry asked, and Alexander could hear the worry in his voice, the fear that Alexander was about to take it back somehow. "I've been in love with you for 2 years," Alexander said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Since the day you helped me move into this apartment, and we stayed up all night talking about everything and nothing. I've been in love with you, and I've been pretending to be just your friend, and it's been killing me." Jerry's eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at Alexander like he couldn't quite process what he had just heard. "2 years," he whispered, and Alexander nodded, feeling exposed and vulnerable, but also relieved to finally have it out in the open. "I know it's not fair," Alexander continued, the words spilling out now that he had started. "I know you were with Sandra, and I tried to be happy for you, I really did, but every time I saw you with her, I wanted to scream because I knew she wasn't right for you. I knew she couldn't make you happy the way you deserved to be happy." Jerry's hands were still on Alexander's face, and his thumbs were moving in small circles across Alexander's cheekbones, and Alexander could see tears gathering in Jerry's eyes. "Alex," Jerry said softly, and his voice was full of wonder and something that might have been regret. "I'm sorry," Alexander said quickly. "I shouldn't have said anything. After what just happened, I couldn't keep pretending anymore." "Don't apologize," Jerry said firmly, and his voice was stronger now. "Don't you dare apologize for loving me." He took a shaky breath, and Alexander could see him gathering his courage. "I think I've been in love with you, too. I think that's why nothing ever worked with Sandra or with any of them. I was measuring every relationship against what I had with you, and they all came up short." Alexander felt his knees go weak at Jerry's words, and he had to grip the counter behind him for support. "Jerry," he started, but Jerry shook his head. "Let me finish," Jerry said. "I think I've been lying to myself for a long time, telling myself that what I felt for you was just friendship because I was scared of what it meant. I've never felt this way about a man before, and it terrifies me, but it also feels like the most honest thing I've ever felt." Alexander reached up to cover Jerry's hands with his own, holding them against his face. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," he said softly. "We can take it slow, see what happens." Jerry's smile was radiant and relieved. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to try this with you." They kissed again then, softer this time, but no less meaningful, and when they broke apart, Jerry laughed, bright and joyful, and Alexander felt like his heart might burst from happiness. They managed to salvage dinner, though the sauce was definitely burnt, and they had to order pizza instead. And they spent the evening curled up on the couch, talking about what this meant for them, what they wanted to try. "I need to be honest with you," Jerry said as they lay tangled together later that night, Alexander's head on Jerry's chest and Jerry's fingers running through his hair. "I'm scared. I don't know how to be with a man, and I'm afraid I'll disappoint you." Alexander lifted his head to look at Jerry, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "You could never disappoint me," he said firmly, "and we'll figure it out together. There's no rush, no pressure. We have all the time in the world." Jerry's smile was soft and grateful, and he pulled Alexander up for another kiss, this one slow and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," Jerry whispered against Alexander's lips, and Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes because he had never thought he would hear those words from Jerry. Not in this context, not with this meaning. "I love you too," Alexander whispered back, and Jerry's arms tightened around him like he was afraid Alexander might disappear. The next few weeks were a revelation for both of them as they navigated this new dynamic between them. Jerry was tentative at first, unsure of himself in ways that broke Alexander's heart, but gradually he began to relax into it, to trust that Alexander wasn't going anywhere, that this was real and solid and worth exploring. They took things slowly, partly because Jerry needed time to adjust to the idea of being with a man, and partly because they both wanted to savor this new phase of their relationship. They had been friends for so long that they already knew each other's rhythms and preferences, but discovering each other as romantic partners was like learning a new language. one that they spoke in touches and glances and soft words whispered in the dark. Alexander watched Jerry bloom under the attention, saw him become more confident and sure of himself as the days passed. Jerry started initiating physical contact more often, reaching for Alexander's hand while they watched television, pressing kisses to his temple while they cooked breakfast, and Alexander treasured every single touch like the gift it was. I never understood why people made such a big deal about relationships, Jerry said one evening as they sat on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars. I always felt like I was acting, playing a part that everyone expected me to play. But this, with you, it doesn't feel like acting. It feels like coming home. Alexander squeezed Jerry's hand, feeling his heart swell with love and gratitude. That's how it's supposed to feel with both of them, he said softly. Easy and natural, and right. Jerry turned to look at me and his eyes bright in the moonlight. I can't believe I almost missed this, he said. I can't believe I almost let my fear keep me from the best thing that's ever happened to me. You didn't miss it, Alexander pointed out. You're here now. We're here now. Jerry's smile was radiant, and he leaned over to kiss Alexander, soft and sweet and full of love. We are, he agreed, and I'm never letting you go. The conversation with Jerry's family went better than either of them had expected, though there were certainly some awkward moments and difficult questions. Jerry's parents were surprised but ultimately supportive, and his sister was thrilled, claiming she had always known there was something special between them. Alexander's own family was equally accepting, and his mother actually cried with happiness when they told her, saying she had never seen Alexander look so content. The hardest part was telling their Wichwalrians, not because they were unsupportive, but because everyone seemed to have opinions about how long they should have been together already. Finally was the most common response, followed by variations of, we all saw this coming and it's about time. Alexander was amazed to discover how obvious their feelings had apparently been to everyone except themselves. Sandra, surprisingly, was gracious about the whole thing when Jerry finally worked up the courage to tell her. I knew there was someone else, she said simply. I could see it in the way you talked about him, the way your whole face lit up whenever he called. I'm happy you figured it out. 3 months after that first kiss in Alexander's kitchen, they were settled into a routine that felt both new and ancient, like they had been together forever but were still discovering new things about each other every day. Jerry had essentially moved into Alexander's apartment, though he still kept his lease for appearance's sake, and they had fallen into an easy domestic rhythm that felt natural and right. It was on a Tuesday evening, as they sat curled together on the couch watching some mindless television show, that Jerry brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. I've been thinking, Jerry said, his fingers playing with the hem of Alexander's shirt, about what comes next. For us, I mean. Alexander muted the television and turned to give Jerry his full attention. What do you mean? Jerry took a deep breath, and Alexander could see the nervousness in his eyes. I mean, I love you and you love me, and this thing between us is real and good, and I want to make it official. I want to move in here properly, and I want to tell everyone that you're not just my boyfriend, you're my partner. I want to build a life with you. Alexander felt his heart skip a beat at Jerry's words, and he reached up to cup Jerry's face in his hands. Are you sure? He asked softly. It's only been 3 months. We don't have to rush into anything. Jerry's smile was soft and certain. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said. I wasted so much time being scared, being confused about who I was and what I wanted. But I know now, I want you, Alexander. I want this life we're building together. Alexander kissed him then, pouring all of his love and gratitude and joy into the kiss. And when they broke apart, they were both crying. Happy tears that spoke of relief and love and the promise of a future together. I want that too, Alexander whispered against Jerry's lips. I want all of it. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to fight about whose turn it is to do the dishes and make up by cooking dinner together. I want everything with you. Jerry laughed, bright and joyful, and pulled Alexander closer until they were pressed together from chest to knee. I love you so much it scares me sometimes, Jerry admitted. I never knew I could feel this much for another person. I know, Alexander said softly. I feel the same way. Sometimes I look at you and I can't believe you're real. Can't believe you're mine. I'm yours, Jerry said firmly, his eyes intense and serious. Completely and utterly yours for as long as you'll have me. Forever then, Alexander said, and Jerry's smile was radiant. They spent the rest of the evening talking about practical things, about Jerry giving up his lease and officially moving in, about combining their belongings and their lives in all the small ways that mattered. They talked about the future they wanted to build together, about traveling and maybe getting a bone and all the mundane, wonderful things that made up a shared life. I have something I want to give you, Jerry said suddenly, pulling away from Alexander and reaching for his jacket, which was draped over the back of the couch. He fumbled in the pocket for a moment before pulling out a small velvet box, and Alexander's heart stopped. Jerry, Alexander breathed, his eyes wide as he stared at the box. It's not what you think, Jerry said quickly, though his cheeks were flushed and his hands were shaking slightly. I mean, it is, but it's not. I'm not proposing, not yet, but I wanted to give you something to show you how serious I am about this, about us. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver band, elegant and understated, and Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes. It's a promise ring, Jerry explained, his voice soft and nervous. A promise that I'm in this for the long haul, that I want to build something real and lasting with you. Alexander looked up at Jerry, seeing the love and hope and vulnerability in his eyes, and felt his heart overflow with emotion. Jerry, he whispered, and Jerry took the ring from the box with trembling fingers. I know we haven't been together very long, Jerry said, but I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for you, for this. And I wanted you to have something tangible, something you could look at and remember that you're loved, that you're chosen. Alexander held out his left hand and Jerry slipped the ring onto his finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for him. Alexander stared down at it for a moment, overwhelmed by the significance of the gesture, then looked back up at Jerry with tears streaming down his cheeks. I love you, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you so much, and I promise you the same thing. I'm in this forever, Jerry. You're stuck with me now. Jerry laughed and kissed him, and they held each other on the couch as the television played, forgotten in the background. Both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had found together. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness and domesticity as they settled into their life together with an ease that surprised both of them. Jerry officially moved in, and they spent weekends combining their belongings and decorating their shared space, arguing good-naturedly about furniture placement and paint colors. Alexander had never realized how much joy there could be in such mundane activities, but everything felt special when he was doing it with Jerry. They had their first real fight about 6 months in over something stupid and trivial that escalated because they were both tired and stressed from work. Alexander couldn't even remember what had started it, but he remembered the sick feeling in his stomach when Jerry stormed out, the fear that this was it, that they had finally hit the wall that would break them apart. Jerry came back 2 hours later with takeout from Alexander's favorite restaurant and an apology that made Alexander cry, and they talked through the fight with a maturity and honesty that surprised them both. I'm not going anywhere, Jerry said firmly, as they lay in bed afterward, Alexander's head on his chest and Jerry's arms wrapped around him. We're going to fight sometimes because that's what people do when they love each other and live together, but I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, remember? Alexander smiled against Jerry's chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Good, he said softly, because I'm not going anywhere either. Their first anniversary arrived on a Thursday in October, exactly 1 year from the night Jerry had shown up at Alexander's door in the rain. They had planned to go out to dinner, to celebrate at some fancy restaurant, but when the day arrived, they both realized they would rather stay home, would rather mark the occasion in the space where they had built their life together. Alexander cooked Jerry's favorite meal while Jerry picked out wine and music, and they ate by candlelight on their balcony, wrapped in blankets against the cool autumn air. They talked about the past year, about how much they had both changed and grown, about the future they were building together. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked as they shared dessert, the question that had been nagging at him for weeks finally spilling out. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed with Sandra, if you had never figured out that you could love me? Jerry set down his fork and looked at Alexander seriously, and Alexander could see the love and certainty in his eyes. Never, Jerry said firmly. Not once, not even for a second. This is the life I was meant to live, Alexander. You are the person I was meant to love. Everything else was just practice, just me stumbling around in the dark until I found my way to you. Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes, and he reached across the table to take Jerry's hand, feeling the familiar weight of the promise ring on his own finger. I love you, he said softly. I love this life we've built together. I love you too, Jerry said, bringing Alexander's hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. And I love our life, and I love our future, whatever it brings. They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and clinging to each other. And afterward they lay tangled together in their bed, talking softly about their hopes and dreams for the years to come. I want to marry you, Jerry said suddenly, the words tumbling out into the darkness between them. I know we've talked about it in abstract terms, but I want to actually do it. I want to stand up in front of everyone we love and promise to spend the rest of my life with you. Alexander's heart skipped a beat, and he turned in Jerry's arms so he could see his face in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Are you asking me? He said softly, and Jerry's smile was soft and wondering. I think I am, Jerry said. I don't have a ring or a plan or any of the things you're supposed to have, but I have love and I have certainty and I have the absolute knowledge that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So yes, Alexander Phillips, I'm asking, will you marry me? Alexander felt his heart overflow with joy and love and the absolute rightness of this moment, this question, this man who had become his entire world. Yes, he whispered, and then louder, yes, of course. Yes. Jerry's laugh was bright and joyful, and he rolled them over so he was hovering above Alexander, his eyes bright with tears and happiness. Really? He asked, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Really? Alexander confirmed, reaching up to pull Jerry down for a kiss that tasted like promise and forever and all the dreams they would build together. They were married 8 months later in Alexander's parents' backyard, surrounded by family and friends who had watched their love story unfold with joy and support. Jerry cried during his vows, and Alexander cried during his, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house when they kissed for the first time as husbands. The reception was small and intimate, just the people who mattered most to them, and as they danced to their first song as a married couple, Alexander looked around at the faces of the people they loved and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the life they had built together. Happy? Jerry whispered in his ear as they swayed together in the center of the dance floor. Impossibly, Alexander whispered back, and Jerry's smile was radiant. Good, Jerry said, pulling back to look at him with eyes full of love and promise, because this is just the beginning. 3 years into their marriage, they bought a house together, a small craftsman bungalow with a big backyard and room to grow. They spent their weekends painting walls and planting gardens, arguing good-naturedly about tile choices, and debating the merits of different kitchen layouts. Alexander had never imagined that home improvement projects could be romantic, but everything felt like an adventure when he was doing it with Jerry. They adopted a golden retriever mix named Charlie, who had been abandoned at the shelter and who attached himself to both of them with the fierce loyalty of a creature who knew he had been saved. Charlie slept between them in bed and followed them around the house, and Alexander often found Jerry having serious conversations with the pig about everything from work stress to what to make for dinner. I think we're becoming those people, Alexander said one evening as he watched Jerry explain to Charlie why they couldn't have pizza for the third night in a row, the ones who treat their pets like children. Jerry looked up at him with mock indignation. Charlie is not a pet, he said seriously. Charlie is a family member who happens to have 4 legs and an unfortunate tendency to eat shoes. Alexander laughed and pulled Jerry into his arms, kissing him softly while Charlie wagged his tail and tried to insert himself between them. I love our weird little family, Alexander said against Jerry's lips. Me too, Jerry said softly. I love everything about the life we've built together. They talk sometimes about having children, about what that might look like for them, but they were in no rush. They were happy with their life as it was, with the quiet domestic bliss they had created together, and they both felt like they had time to figure out what came next. "I never thought I could be this happy," Jerry said one evening as they sat on their back porch, watching Charlie chase fireflies in the yard while they shared a bottle of wine. "When I was with Sandra, or with anyone before you, I always felt like I was waiting for something, like there was something missing. But with you, I feel complete." Alexander squeezed Jerry's hand, feeling the familiar swell of love and gratitude that still caught him off guard sometimes, even after all these years together. "I know exactly what you mean," he said softly. "I spent so long thinking that love was supposed to be hard work, that you had to fight for it and struggle to make it work. But it's the easiest thing I've ever done." Jerry turned to look at him, his eyes soft with love and contentment. "Do you think we'll always be this happy?" he asked. And Alexander could hear the wonder in his voice, like he still couldn't quite believe their good fortune. "I think we'll have challenges," Alexander said honestly. "Life isn't always easy, and we'll face things that test us. But I think as long as we face them together, as long as we keep choosing each other every day, we'll be okay. More than okay." Jerry's smile was radiant, and he leaned over to kiss Alexander softly. "I choose you," he said against his lips, "today and tomorrow and every day after that. I choose you, Alexander Phillips." "And I choose you, Jerry Phillips," Alexander said back, and Jerry's laugh was bright and joyful at the sound of his married name. As the sun set over their backyard and Charlie finally collapsed in an exhausted heap at their feet, Alexander felt a deep sense of peace and contentment settle over him. This was the life he had dreamed of but never quite believed he could have, and every day with Jerry felt like a gift he had never expected to receive. 5 years into their marriage, Jerry surprised Alexander with a trip to Italy for their anniversary, a 2-week vacation through Tuscany that felt like a second honeymoon. They stayed in small bed and breakfasts and ate too much pasta and drank too much wine, and they spent lazy afternoons exploring ancient towns and making love in hotel rooms with windows that looked out over rolling hills covered in vineyards. "I want to remember this forever," Jerry said one evening as they sat on the terrace of their hotel in Florence, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber. "I want to remember the way you look right now, the way the light is hitting your face, the way you're smiling at me like I'm the best thing you've ever seen." "You are the best thing I've ever seen," Alexander said simply, and Jerry's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "I love you so much it still surprises me sometimes," Jerry said, reaching across the table to take Alexander's hand. "I love you so much that sometimes I can't believe it's real. Can't believe I get to keep you." "You get to keep me," Alexander assured him, bringing Jerry's hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to his wedding ring. "Forever and always, you get to keep me." They made love that night with the windows open and the warm Italian air flowing over their skin, and afterward they lay tangled together in the unfamiliar bed, talking softly about their future and all the adventures they still wanted to have together. When they returned home, they were both glowing with happiness and the deep contentment that came from being completely secure in their love for each other. Charlie was ecstatic to see them, and their house felt like a sanctuary after 2 weeks of living out of suitcases. "Home," Jerry said simply as they stood in their living room, surrounded by their things and their life together, and Alexander knew exactly what he meant. "Home," Alexander agreed, and they held each other in the familiar space they had created together, feeling grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment. Now, as they sat on their couch with the space between them disappeared and Jerry's words hanging in the air like a promise, Alexander felt the same sense of rightness and completeness that had defined their entire relationship. Jerry's hand was warm on his knee, and his eyes were bright with love and certainty, and Alexander knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. "I miss how we used to be too," Alexander said softly, and Jerry's smile was radiant and relieved. "Do you think we can find our way back to that?" Jerry asked, and Alexander could hear the hope in his voice. "I think we never really lost it," Alexander said, leaning closer until their foreheads were almost touching. "I think it's still here, between us, waiting for us to remember how to reach for it." Jerry's eyes fluttered closed, and when he opened them again, they were bright with tears and love, and the absolute certainty that had carried them through 7 years of marriage and would carry them through whatever came next. "I love you," Jerry whispered. And Alexander felt his heart overflow with the same joy and gratitude he had felt on their first night together, on their wedding day, on every ordinary Tuesday when he woke up next to the man who had become his entire world. "I love you too," Alexander whispered back. And when Jerry kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise, Alexander knew that they were exactly where they belonged, exactly where they had always been meant to be, together.